We're delighted to host CIWEM here in UCC. I was a member when I was a consulting engineer back in the last century. And I took the academic route. I started a PhD when I was about 36, and I completed when I was about 39, and I came here when I was 40. So my academic career has been quite squashed, but we're fascinated by the area of energy, climate, and marine within MaREI, which ties in greatly with what CIWEM undertake. So we started this centre back in 2013. It is a Science Foundation Ireland centre. It's one of the first 7 centres, and it's been an incredible journey. It's probably aged me by about 15 years. We've made some great friends along the way, and we've grown quite significantly. So it's an all of Ireland centre, and we're hoping to get Queen's in Northern Ireland to join us. So you can see at the moment we have universities in Limerick, in Trinity, in Dublin, in Galway, Teagasc, DIAS, ESRI, the Economic Social Research Institute. So the concept is for people coming into this country and looking at energy, climate or marine, it's a one-stop shop. So we've academics across the country and we've expertise in different places. And it's been a great process because rather than trying to compete for some funding with someone in Galway, we now work together. So I would spend Tuesday in Galway with 10 colleagues talking about circular economy, environmental management. And so it's a great process. It's a very integrated process. And we now have 200 researchers, and each of these researchers have fabulous stories in many different areas. So we have work in tidal devices, in offshore wind, in materials, we tag mammals, we look at the dive path of seals, we look at gannets, we look at puffins, and the reason is if you're going to have offshore wind, you don't want to be decapitating puffins. And if you've tidal devices, you don't want poor seals being battered in the tidal devices. And it's amazing when we've done a lot of work in the Lower Harbour and we've 3 wind turbines down there. A year was done studying the flight path of birds. So we have a very integrated process. We have microbiologists, marine ecologists, lawyers, we leave lawyers in, civil engineers, electrical engineers, biotechnologists, microbiologists. We have some fantastic people. We have Mace Head in the west of Ireland where we look at particulate matter. So we look at burning wood, and it's good for carbon, but it's very bad for air quality. So we have a whole range of fantastic people. We're very enthused by what they do. We also have 50 industries. The model is we have to have industry cash. If we don't have industry cash, we ain't doing the work. So we have 50 fantastic industries who support us, and most of my PhDs spend a day a week in industry. So it keeps us very, very, very relevant. We've done lovely work at the moment with the distillery in Middleton, and they give me lovely bottles of whiskey around Christmas time. So we're looking at decarbonising the production of whiskey. We have the 4th largest whiskey producer in Middleton, well worth a visit. They won the best whiskey for Redbreast, 10 years old. So we look at how do you decarbonise that? How can they be carbon neutral in producing whiskey? What's very interesting is they have 60 megawatt boilers. And if you say we're going to electrify everything, if you try and run 60 megawatts of electricity down to Middleton, it's massive. And they use gas. And they want to decarbonise. So they're looking at renewable gas, or they're looking at other things. We have brought in our first year, I know Gillian's in the room someplace, we had to put in cash. We had 1,017 industry cash after year 1, 1,000 euros. We've now brought in 63 million. So we're now a large centre, and the idea is that our PhDs go to industry. We want our brilliant young academics to sit in industry and revolutionise this country and make it sustainable and innovative and brilliant. And we have collaborations across 36 countries. Our motivations are quite simple. Energy, which is a major component of climate change. Climate, and we have a lot of adaptation, mitigation, we have a lot of dialogue. We do a lot of work where we go into communities and we talk to communities about what they can do, what they could do, and then we go away and we leave the communities think about it and we go back in. And it's termed education and public engagement. I didn't know what EPE meant a year ago, and now it's one of the most important aspects of my life. We have to record, each of us, every year, 4 pieces of EPE. We had to say what they thought beforehand, what we said, how long we stopped talking for, and what we thought afterwards. So we have to engage. And the concept is that we have a literate community of people who believe in good science, and they believe in evidence, and I really feel that evidence is something that's been trashed around the world in the last few years. I mean, evidence is evidence, and we're trying to go to views and give them evidence of what can happen. One thing I found amazing, we were going to Dingle to talk about different concepts, and the day before we went, there was an activity where someone who's against 5G was presenting that everyone would get cancer. And we were looking at supplying mobile phone data that they could turn on and off their immersions, and all of a sudden this is going to give them cancer. So it's amazing what you meet when you engage with people. So you bring them back and you talk about, well, look, you have a phone against your head. We're looking at you organizing the temperature in your house. We're looking at electric cars and how it can all work together, the Internet of Things. And the blue economy is very, very important. So we have a massive, between Britain and Ireland, we have a huge ocean. And in Ireland, we talk about sea blindness. We really haven't engaged with the ocean, and it's such a huge resource, and the resources in the ocean are things that we now want to utilize. If I take a step back as to why we're all doing this, this is from Brian Gallagher. So there's two directors in MaREI, myself and Brian. Brian is the Professor of Energy Engineering here. So these are some of his graphs, and you can see the red line is business as usual, and this is Ireland, and it's a low carbon pathway. So if we do nothing, we're going to continue producing more and more and more and more. And then we have this target of reducing energy down to 20% by 2050. And that's a huge task, to be 20 times more efficient in what we do. It's a massive task. And this is our proposal. So you're reducing, you're greening, you're using wind turbines and PV. But the problem is cattle. We have the third highest level of bovinity in the planet. Bovinity is defined as being bovine-like. That's not what I mean. What I mean is ratio of cattle to people. So we have about 7 million cattle and about 5 million people. And they belch and they burp and they have big slurry storage that are emitting methane into the atmosphere. And we're looking at Food Harvest 2020 and increasing the herd and more milk and more meat. And that's what happens. That's going nowhere. So our 80% reduction in carbon is a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas. And that's a big, big problem. And globally, bioenergy is quite important here. I found this unusual in that modern bioenergy is what they term it, but bioenergy supplies the same amount of energy as all the other sources together. So when you look at wind and solar and PV, modern bioenergy is the same quantity. So we need bioenergy. When you look at electricity, electricity is only 20% of energy. 40% is transport and 40% is thermal energy. And we have electrified far, far better in terms of decarbonisation, but we're not doing it in transport. Most of us here are probably driving diesel vehicles, and I would imagine anyone who came on this island came on by a plane or a ferry which was using fossil fuel. We find it very difficult to decarbonise aviation. Fossil fuel, I have a new PhD starting, and he's going to solve that problem. But even in heat, it's bioenergy. In transport, it's bioenergy. So it's an area that's quite important. And the International Energy Agency have a perspective, we need to double bioenergy. And we need to use that bioenergy in transport. And then they talk about negative emissions. And this is where I read this report, the European Academy of Science, and after I read that report, I didn't feel that good. So these are emissions, and this is what we have to do. So this is 2070. So carbon neutral by 2070. And this is a massive ask. I mean, when you're looking at China and Brazil and rainforests and ferries, and I don't know what's going to happen to planes and ferries and cars. And what they're suggesting, again, the budget we've left is 800 gigatons of carbon. And they're saying that's all we've left. And it's not 2040, it's now. I mean, every bit of carbon we emit is there. So we have that problem. Like everything we're doing now, we can't wait, well, we'll do it in 2040. I mean, all the carbon we produce will be in that atmosphere. We're allowed to emit another 800 gigatons or gone beyond 2 degrees Celsius. And when we go beyond 2 degrees Celsius, it's just going to roll down the hill and we have a problem. So what they talk about is negative emission technologies. And one of those is direct air carbon capture. So you build a machine that sucks in carbon dioxide. One of our recent papers, James Glynn, published in Nature, 25% of the world's electricity would be required to run a machine that sucks CO2 out of the atmosphere. I mean, the extent of the problem is phenomenal. And what we do in our centre is we put numbers and evidence on these concepts. Because what I find shockingly frightening is this. So what they want is negative emission technologies, such as these big machines sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. So the perspective is, if you put up a wind turbine, that's going to be carbon neutral. Not good enough, because we've all this stuff up there and we have to suck it in. So they talk about planting forests. We would have to cover 70% of the world's arable land and forest to have any effect. I mean, the scale of these problems. So if you do read this book, Environmental Academy of Science, you would need maybe some Prozac and whiskey when you finish reading it. It's quite a depressing read. It's sort of, you're contemplating infinity. What they do talk about is bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration. Now, bioenergy gets a difficult name, and I suppose the concept is you chop down a tree and you have a wood chip, and that's not good. But what carbon neutral is, and the tree is probably not a good example, but it's some plant that sucks in carbon dioxide, and then you put in a power plant, you produce electricity, and the carbon dioxide is sucked back in by the plant, by the crop, and that's seen as carbon neutral. What's carbon negative is you grow the plant, you produce electricity, and the carbon is put underground. Now, there's a proposal within the harbour here to sequester carbon from 2 gas turbines, and the cost is about 7 billion. Like, 7 billion is probably 3 or 4 children's hospitals. I mean, when it comes to the opportunity cost of someone saying, we're going to have carbon negative technology and we're going to spend 7 billion euros on taking CO2 out to the old gas fields and into the ground. Dan, will you get elected? It's very hard. I mean, I couldn't imagine President Trump saying, I'm going to spend this money on carbon sequestration. So it is a problem. And I mean, we do have this problem. I mean, this is what the IPCC say we need to do. If you want to be neutral in 2050, you're building these things in 2035. So one thing I'd like to get back to is my idea of bioenergy is a lot more complex than wood chips. And within our review over the years, people talk about, well, offshore wind is 4 cents a kilowatt hour, you can forget about bioenergy. What we do have in Ireland, again, is this level of bovinity. We have 30% of our greenhouse gas coming from cattle. We have food waste. And if you slurry in a tank, methane goes off up to the atmosphere at a global warming potential of 28. So you've got a big problem. We have all of this methane that's going to the atmosphere, and we can't ignore it. And people say, well, just cover it. If you cover methane in a tank, your health and safety guy is going to shut you down. So, like, there is a concept of if you store that methane and you put it in a bus, the global warming potential of CO2 is 1. It's 28 times better to emit carbon dioxide than to emit methane. And these are things I see, and my Twitter sphere, I talk about in my own mind, I have these evangelical environmentalists who say, you're reducing carbon, you can't have biogas. But this is a plant in Sweden, Linköping, and they have a slaughter facility. Now, we have lots of slaughter facilities. When you slaughter a bovine, you've got 150 kilograms of belly grass, fermented silage, and it's hot, and it produces methane, and we plough it into the land. So what they do in Sweden is they put into a big digester, they make methane, and they run the bus service. So they have 65 buses, all the waste collection lorries. They have 600 cars, and they have a train all running on methane. And that is greenhouse gas negative. So the more you drive, the better off the environment is. So I have an electric car. I love my electric car. But I'm very aware that it's 30% green and 70% brown, because the Irish electricity grid is 70% brown. But if you're driving that, you're greenhouse gas negative. If you drive an electric car, you're making a 30% improvement on your electricity supply. So I work also for the International Energy Agency, and we produce these books. So we're trying to disseminate information, and we're trying to educate the workforce into the complexity. It's not black and white, there's all these colours in between. And this is a lovely farm in Denmark, and it's an organic farm. There's no weed killer and there's no fertilizer. They have animals, and they put the dung in a digester, and they're making biofertilizer. So because they have a biofertilizer, they get very, very good yields of crops, and they also produce milk, and it's certified as greenhouse gas negative. I would see that as a lovely model for Ireland. We have lots of cattle. get rid of fossil fuel. When you talk about fertilizer, it's natural gas. We make fertilizer out of natural gas. So you get your biofertilizer, and you make organic biogas, and you can be carbon negative. This is a brewery in Austria, and they're carbon neutral. So they make beer, and they take all the stillage, and they make biogas, and the biogas goes into the burners, and they don't burn natural gas anymore. They're burning biogas. This is a colleagues of ours in Brazil. They had 400 hectares of campus parkland grass. It's where they are, and they always had a problem with the grass, so they decided they would digest it, and they're running 65 cars off the grass cuttings. What's interesting, there's more land under golf course in the United Kingdom than crops used for bioenergy. And all those golf courses are looking for places to put their grass. And our perspective is, well, you could put it into a biogas plant and you could make a transport fuel. This is a paper we did during the week with IFA, and we looked at the Renewable Energy Directive. And the Renewable Energy Directive is our set of rules, what we have to do. And it says that we have to have 3.5% advanced biofuels by 2030. It's capped ethanol from crops, it's capped biodiesel from palm oil and from rapeseed. So we have to have advanced biofuels. And one of these fuels is grass, another is algae, and another is gaseous fuel from non-biological origin. And that's something that we look at, gaseous fuels from non-biological origin. And what they have done is they have made a set of rules, and this paper is looking at the rules. So we've worked out from grass, if we made biomethane, we'd produce 23 grams CO2 per megajoule. However, the fossil fuel comparator for transport and the greenhouse gas savings for transport are far easier to meet than heat. So the EU wants biogas in transport. It doesn't want it in heat. It's 3 times harder to meet the criteria for heat than transport. And MaREI Donnelly, who's an Irish lady, she led the EU in the production of this document. Her perspective is a wood chip makes heat, it doesn't run a bus. Biogas will run a bus, so you do not use biogas for heat. And she's very strong in this opinion. Anything that will power transport goes to transport. So energy vectors are not all the same. They talk about exergy. So transport fuel is a higher form than heat. This is a piece of work we did when we looked at fugitive emissions. So we looked across loads of biogas plants and we worked out how to minimize any slippage. And we worked out you can limit it to 2% by good practice. So the slippage across a biogas plant. Open slurry emits 18%. So straight away you're into this carbon negative. So we evaluated a number of minus 250 grams CO2 per megajoule. California Air Resources Board have a number of minus 255 grams CO2 per megajoule. So we have evidence from 2 learned bodies that biomethane is greenhouse gas negative. So we can run buses. This is Nottingham Bus, and they run their buses on biomethane, so they are greenhouse gas negative. So it's better than electricity at this moment. And it is a sequestration process because you're reducing methane that would have got to the atmosphere that's 28 times worse than CO2. So we tend to look at the whole area of green gas, and I'll go through little bits. We look at gasification, we look at gaseous fuel from non-biological origin, we look at algae, and we try to map into the future what this system will look like. What's very important, and this I reviewed for the summer for the International Energy Agency World Energy Outlook, twice the energy on the planet is sold as gas than electricity. And they're saying it's very, very hard to move off gas onto electricity. If you look at Ireland, we sell, I think it's 10 to 15% of baby formula on this planet. So we get milk, and we evaporate the water off, and we powder. And it's all done by gas. Our alcohol production, you evaporate alcohol off stillage. Very hard to do that with electricity, and we use twice as much energy doing that as we do with electricity. So gas is a vector that is not easy to be converted or changed to electricity. So there is a viewpoint, and 6 European gas grids have committed to 100% green gas by 2050. So there was renewable electricity, it's now renewable gas. And what's interesting, these are the countries. So I run this group, and we have 17 countries. But you can see here the growth in putting gas into the gas grid is quite almost exponential. So we're at 532 facilities within those 17 countries. The UK was very late to the game, but they've really embraced the first person who put gas in the gas grid in the United Kingdom was Prince Charles in Cornwall. And I met him and we spoke about it. But the UK has really gone into the area of digesting food waste and putting that gas into the gas grid. And if you look at, like, this is one such facility. This is in Holland. And it's a green gas hub. It's very interesting. There's around 20 biogas plants. And they pump their biogas to a hub. And this hub processes that biogas. And it makes CO2 and it sells the CO2. It makes biomethane. It makes liquid biomethane. So they only take biogas and they process it and they sell about 20 million litres of diesel equivalent per annum in the form of methane. I won't spend too much on this. We can gasify woody crops and we can methanize them and put them into the gas grid. One thing I've really enjoyed doing as an academic is seaweed. We have a huge resource of seaweed around these islands. One problem we have is ulva lactuca. I cycle by here on a Sunday morning. Sea lettuce. It's about 5% ammonia and 5% sulfur. It smells of rotten eggs. It comes from bays which are long and shallow and suffer from eutrophication. So non-point source pollution and septic tanks cause too much nutrients in the bay, and you get this problem. We get 10,000 tons in Timaligue, which is here. Lannon Bay in France gets about 100,000 tons. And we worked with an industry that we could power 285 cars by converting that to biomethane. We're also being consulted at the moment about sargassum, both in Mexico and the Caribbean. It's a very similar type of seaweed lacking any structure. But we then started looking at really nice seaweed. So we go down to West Cork, and we take in seaweed in January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, and we have crab sandwich, and the seaweeds are lovely. This is MaREI digitata. It's common kelp. And what we found is when we looked at it that this is carbohydrate, this is protein, this is salt, very salty. But as you come towards the summer, this is August, you get lots of carbohydrates, very little proteins, a lot less salt. It's like an apple, it ripens. And we can get 50 litres of diesel per tonne of this laminaria. And then the idea is that you cultivate seaweed, and I have colleagues in Norway who grow seaweed to clean the water. So they have eutrophication of bays, they grow seaweed, seaweeds clean the water. So the concept we're looking at, if you grow fish, like the salmon we had in the room inside, 10 times less carbon per calorie than beef. So you grow fish, and then you surround the fish with seaweed. The seaweed cleans the water, and it grows typically 2.5 times faster around a fish farm than in pristine waters. So I travel over to China quite often. I have some great Chinese colleagues here. And in China, they actually spread fertilizer on the water to make the seaweed grow faster. So the concept is you grow fish, and then you grow seaweed that cleans the water, and the seaweed ripens in August, and then you make silage out of that seaweed. And the reason you make silage is that you want to have a feedstock all year round, not just in August. And also you make some lovely volatile fatty acids, lovely acetic acid and butyric acid, and the bugs really like it, and they make lots and lots of gas. And we can also make products like polyphenols. In bladderwrack, there's lots of polyphenols. We can make alginate. My daughter's vegetarian. She bakes a lot. She won't, for some reason, doesn't like rendered animal parts in her cheesecake. So we have to find vegetarian alginate. So it's all, on my birthday, my wife brought me for a seaweed bath. So we bathed it in Fucus spiralis at 60 degrees Celsius, and it's all twiny. It's very refreshing. I'd advise it. But it's full of alginates, which are great for gelling agents. So when we look at all the seaweed around this country, we have a huge technology that we pay very little attention to. So we found that ensiling seaweed made us a lovely source of biofuel. And then we started looking at microalgae, because the EU talk about the holy grail of microalgae, and my colleagues in China have some huge microalgae ponds. So you can use the CO2 from biogas to grow microalgae. And microalgae can be sold. So in China, you get these pellets of microalgae for 25 euros a packet. So the idea is you might be in rural coastal Ireland or Cornwall, and you have your slurries, you have food waste, you put in some seaweed, you take out polyphenols and alginates, the residue goes into the biogas plant. You then upgrade that for biomethane and run some buses, and the CO2 then can be used to grow microalgae. So one thing we talk about in the west of Ireland is keeping GA teams. We want to have young men and women in our rural communities that they'll be vibrant communities, that they will play local sports, that they will keep the place alive. To me, if you have these types of systems in rural Ireland, where you have seaweed farms, you're making alginate, butyrate, you're taking in your feedstocks, your slurries, your food waste. Like an idea we have in Dingle is that we can have biomethane and we'd have a little bus, and that bus would take you to Kenmare, it would run on biomethane, and you'd have a vibrant community, you'd have sustainability. Like, for example, in Dingle, they spend 1 million a year taking their food waste to water for it to be treated. 1 million a year. So you build a digester, you've saved 1 million a year before you start. And then you're producing biomethane and biofertilizer. And so it brings in this lovely circular economy. What our latest paper, which I'm very proud of, Archison was the lead author, is the idea of growing microalgae as a means of upgrading the biogas. So the microalgae go through the biogas, they suck out the CO2, and there's lots of deep science. But it's a lovely process again. So rather than having scrubbers taking out the CO2 using lots of energy, your microalgae actually are put through the biogas, through a solution, carbonate, bicarbonate. They take out the CO2 and they grow. So you're getting pure methane, and you also have this algal product. And this paper looks at all of the uses for algae, and they give you an awful lot of money. Energy is very cheap. So if you want to be viable and financially viable, you need to have products associated with it. I'm nearly there. I know you're all looking forward to a meal. This is an area I think is really nice. This is the Dutch green gas roadmap. So they start off with anaerobic digestion, then it's into gasification, then it's algae, and then it's electricity. So we talk about electrofuels. And electrofuels is the production of fuels from electricity. You say, why would you want to make fuel from electricity? The problem with electricity is that wind and solar work when they work. So we've had some relations with Dubai and DIWA, and they're going to PV. PV will give electricity by day, but not by night. And a big issue we have, and within the IEA we talk about this in the future, if you're in India, you will have PV electricity by day, very low carbon intensity. By night, it's going to be coal. So if you plug in your car by day, it's really good. If you plug it in by night, it's really bad. So you've got the Internet of Things. You're going to have all these devices saying, plug in your car now, run your dishwasher now, because if you do it by night, it's coal. But a problem we have here, this is Ireland, this is 2020, and it's nighttime. So Ireland is heading for 40% electricity from wind. The capacity factor is 40%. So when it's not blowing, it's not blowing. But when it is blowing, it's 40% divided by 0.4. And then if we're in bed, it's worse. So we have all this electricity that we can't use because it's in the middle of the night, we're all in bed, and we're going to have 70% intermittent renewable electricity. So there's going to be lots of times when there is too much. And what we're looking at is we can convert that to hydrogen. London Bus is going to run off hydrogen from Kent, from an offshore wind farm, and they're going to produce hydrogen and put it into buses made by Wright Brothers in Ballymena. So this is a trial, and this is something we think is quite interesting. In the north of Germany, there's lots and lots of wind turbines. So this is Wörtel, and when you're up there, I think the landscape is blighted. There's so many wind turbines. But the problem is there's just too much electricity at times. So Audi set up this facility, and it's electrolysis. So they don't ask for electricity. I spent some time with the manager of combined cycle gas turbine, and he was more stressed than me, which is quite unusual, because he has to go offline because the wind turbines are coming on. He has to go offline by night. If he doesn't come back on in a half an hour's time, he's going to lose his tariff. So it's on, off, because the wind is blowing, the wind isn't blowing, and he is a combined cycle gas turbine. And a lot of the gas turbines are now charging 100,000 euros to go offline and 100,000 euros to come back online because they need a model. So what this is rather than telling the power plant go offline, they spin it to this electrolysis. So they don't ask for hydrogen, they don't ask for electricity. When there's too much electricity, it's spilled here, and they have hydrogen. There's no market for hydrogen at the moment. So what they did is they built it next to a food waste digester. So all the food waste goes here, and it's digested, and they take out the CO2 and they put the methane into the gas grid. And it's very sustainable because it's food waste to methane. But the CO2 left behind, neat CO2. So the hydrogen from the electrolysis, from the wind, is mixed with the CO2, and they make methane. Typically, biogas is 50% methane and 50% CO2, and the hydrogen will convert all that CO2 to methane, so they double the output. So if you have a biogas plant producing 2 megawatts, when you put hydrogen in there, you're making 4 megawatts. But in Germany, they have a green gas cert. You don't buy a metre cubed of biomethane, you buy CO2 saved. So the food waste biomethane is very, very sustainable, but they call it e-gas is even more sustainable because it's electricity that would have been spilled. It's CO2 that's taken out of the atmosphere, so it's deemed greenhouse gas negative. So they have 2 injection points which are metered, and they sell it to Audi. Well, they are Audi. But when you buy your car, you buy it on a per month basis, but you also get a card and you buy your fuel. So you're getting this biomethane in a natural gas vehicle, Audi. We're scientists, we've done lots of work in hydrogen CO2. This is a catalytic process, but I like bugs. So we have these bugs and they eat carbon dioxide and hydrogen and they make methane. So we spent a lot of time working on this and we produced what I think is a very, very seminal paper, and it's Methanothermobacterium wolffi. And he likes only hydrogen and carbon dioxide, and because he's wolfy, he likes tungsten. He put in tungsten and he works better. So we ran this for about 1.5 years and we got more or less pure methane out of hydrogen and carbon dioxide. And the concept we now have is there is about 17,000 anaerobic digesters in Europe. And what we're looking at is called second generation upgrading. So when all this electricity is being produced by night in Germany, in Wurzel, in Ireland, and it's just been used, it's been produced, we see farmers having little electrolysis units. Now, I hope they don't have a health and safety officer, but we see farmers with an electrolysis unit and then put the hydrogen into the reactor. So the biogas, which is 50% CO2, becomes almost pure methane. Now we have, I won't go into details, we have an in situ and an ex situ, but we think this system would work in all the existing anaerobic digesters on the planet. So rather than having 50% CO2 and 50% methane, they will have pure methane coming out the end, and they will have dealt with the variability of hydrogen. So it's a storage mechanism, and it's a conversion of a vector from electricity to a transport fuel. This is called gaseous fuel from non-biological origin. And the EU are insisting that we have gaseous fuel from non-biological origin. And one thing we have sort of looked at, Shane McDonough's producing his PhD, is in the cost of this. When you're producing hydrogen, there's 2 big costs: buying electricity and the electrolysis system. And people talk about curtailed electricity. So you'll get that electricity that is spilled for 1,000 hours a year, and you get very, very cheap electricity. The problem is, if you're operating for 2 hours a day, it's 12 times too big, and your capital costs get really, really large. So we found a sweet spot. 6,000 hours per year will give us biomethane at what is €1 per litre diesel equivalent. We bid at 50 cent a kilowatt hour, and we get all this electricity, and the average price we pay is 3.5 cent a kilowatt hour. So we're buying electricity. Now the problem with that, and there's always problems, is that our grid is 70% brown. And if you produce hydrogen from a grid that's 70% brown, you've probably 80% carbon intensity because there's an inefficiency in bringing it down. So it's hydrogen, great, but it's still got a carbon footprint, and we deal with evidence. It's all evidence. So we have another paper, and this is really nice. We have a forecasting model. So what we've looked at, and again, we need the Internet of Things, is that if the wind is high, we know that all those wind turbines will be on, and we will have green electricity, and also curtailment will happen. And when curtailment happens, electricity gets cheap. There's actually negative pricing in Germany at the moment. You'll be paid if you can use it, rather than asking a CCGT plant to shut down. So we've looked at wind forecasting, and we've also looked at price. When electricity gets really, really cheap, it means all of the wind turbines are blowing. So we came up with a model that will reduce the carbon intensity of the hydrogen by 56% and also reduce the cost by 57%. But it demands Internet of Things. So this is where we need the Tyndalls of the world to help us to figure out what's the carbon intensity, tell the electrolysis, go online. The farmer has his little phone, electrolysis starts working, hydrogen's being produced, it's very cheap, goes into his digester, free upgrading. I'm nearly there. Denmark, I'm very fond of Denmark. Denmark has a lot of anaerobic digestion. They tend to have co-ops, they work very well together. So we've done a lot of work with the Danish colleagues. At the moment, Denmark has the highest portion of renewable gas in the grid, 10%, but they have another 10% that goes to combined heat and power. So at this moment in time, Denmark has the production capacity of 20% of gas in the gas grid. And you can see here by 2035, they expect all of their gas to be green. Now, the gas fields are drying up, but this came from a number of reasons. It came from the fact that they don't like pollution. so they don't like contaminated water, so they said you can't spread slurry on the land because it causes pollution. And therefore, it has to go into a digester. So this produces about 20 million litres of diesel equivalent per annum of biomethane, and they're expecting to add power to gas to the system. So they're going to take hydrogen from loads of wind turbines in Denmark, stick hydrogen in, you double the output. So they're going for an awful lot of green gas with electrofuels in there. And this is where policy is quite interesting. They're actually exporting to Sweden. In Denmark, they're funded to build the digesters because it reduces water pollution. They sell it into Sweden. Sweden is not grant-aided to build digesters. Sweden has a very high tax on fuels. So if you're Danish, you get a grant to build your digester, you get cheaper biomethane, you sell it to Sweden, and you avail of the carbon tax in Sweden. So the Swedes are very upset that it's cheaper to import gas from Denmark than to produce it themselves. So what we need in Ireland is we need a bit of policy, and I've spoken to our Minister for Energy, I've spoken to Tagus, I've spoken to the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. This is a plant in Denmark, again, I'm very fond of it. 50% of all slurries are now captured by anaerobic digestion in Denmark because of water pollution. So what they have is, if you're a farmer, you can't put it on the land. It has to be digested first. So this is a system of pipes. So they have little pipes going out to farms. So the average radius of collection is 25 kilometres. The farmer goes to a sump, drops the slurry in there. It's churned off to the digester. There's an anchor tenant. In this case, they have wastewater sludge and flotation sludge as an anchor tenant. All the slurries come in. They send biofertilizer back out to the farmer. And when you digest slurry, it becomes a lot more amenable in terms of nutrient value. They have a trailing shoe. I know in Ireland we like to throw our slurry up in the air and see where it lands, and all this stuff is volatiles. You can't do that in Denmark. I don't know why. They put it into the ground, they put it along, and it's far more effective. So again, they're producing 20 million litres of carbon negative biomethane, and they sell a lot of it to Audi. We looked at Ireland, and one of the things we're looking at is freight. And we see freight is very important because how do you decarbonise? And we do a lot of work in the west of Ireland. I spent some time with Tralee Oysters, a fabulous place out in Castle Gregory. They grow oysters, little seeding guys, and they grow them for 4 years, and they have a bag this size, and they auction it. They get about 10,000 euros, and they put it in the back of a truck in water, and they have around a 20-hour window. Brexit is causing them massive problems because we have a land bridge. So normally that truck with the oysters goes through England and goes on to France, and then that bag of oysters is taken out and put in the bay in Nanan Bay, and the French are French oysters. But they all originate from Kerry, and it's the cleanest place for growing oysters. That's not going to run electricity. You're not going to have electric trucks. I mean, that's going to run on diesel at the moment, but we would see biomethane. And this piece here is haulage. So we're looking at biomethane as a source of decarbonising haulage. And what we looked at over here, this is 40% of all slurry, power to gas, will meet haulage. So we're asking the government to say, by 2040 we'll not spread slurry, by 2030 half of it won't be spread, and we can make biomethane and we can run haulage. I won't go into detail here. We can make it for €1 a litre diesel equivalent. From food waste, we can go a lot cheaper. We've been working with GNIs or industry, and we've done the future of renewable gas for them. We've had the first gas to grid up in Nerney, so it's food waste, and it has a methane that would run 65 buses. And the concept, we've also worked on green gas certification. So the gas, if it comes from food waste, if it comes from slurry, if it comes from electricity, you get a certificate saying what the greenhouse gas savings are. And we have this project where we're going to have lots and lots of digesters around the gas grid, putting gas into the gas grid, and the target for 2030 is 20%. So highlights, last slide, circular economy. If you put up a wind turbine, you make electricity, and that's what you do. If you build an anaerobic digester, you're taking slurry, you're making the biofertilizer, you're producing CO2 that can be sold, you're improving water quality, and it's very hard to put a value on that. Like, my well is polluted, and I paid €8,000 for a well cleaning system, as did my neighbour on the left, as did my neighbour on the right. It's not costed. But if there was a digester, I spent one Christmas going for a cycle, and my local farmer had a hose held straight up in the air and slurry was going up because the slurry tanks had overfilled and he had nothing else to do with it. So he's fountaining slurry up in the air, and I'm thinking, my well is polluted. I mean, it's a concept that is difficult. We plough belly grass from cattle into the land, and my Swedish colleagues would say, you pollute your water. And I say 30% of wells in Ireland are polluted. So we have to do things better, and anaerobic digestion green gas is part of that environmental sustainability. It's part of improving our environment. Advanced biofuels, it's the easiest source of advanced biofuel. And we need to do things a little bit better. We need to sit down and have policy about how we do things. We export food waste. We put it on a ship in Cork and it goes out. I read an article recently, Brexit, in Britain, they also export food waste and they import it. Once you leave the EU, that's over. If Ireland was leaving the EU, we'd have to deal with our food waste. And the obvious way to deal with it is to make biomethane by digesting it. Okay, I'm finished. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Still interested in a grander scale thinking of role of hydrogen in all of this. But I guess the sort of joining up question I have is around scalability. So a lot of the solutions you were talking about were quite local at a community level or at a farm level. But I wonder what you think about, from a global economy point of view, from the global energy transition, what is the role of both bioenergy and indeed hydrogen in really solving this problem on a grand scale? Can we go there?
Yeah. Well, I can give two examples. One, I work with hydrogen because our latest paper is looking at, we're going to be building in the east of Ireland, so between Ireland and the UK, offshore wind. And we have great expertise in floating wind turbines, which is a major element of what we do. But we're looking at gigawatts of electricity production from offshore wind coming ashore in Dundalk or Drogheda. And there isn't electrical infrastructure. And this is one thing that I think people don't fully get, that we're going to spend about 8 or 9 billion running connected between France and Ireland to allow us to have wind turbines. But if you bring that amount of electricity ashore in, say, Drogheda, there isn't electrical infrastructure. If you start laying pylons across to these very scenic areas, it could take 10 years. So one of the things we've been looking at is hydrogen. So if you bring that electricity ashore and sell a certain amount for electricity, but have your electrolysis systems and make hydrogen. I was at a fabulous presentation in Colorado with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and the States doesn't have a great infrastructure. It wouldn't have the infrastructure that Europe has in terms of public transport. But they were saying all the wind really is in Denver. There'll be loads of wind turbines, but nobody will leave this overhead pylons travel through a state. So their idea is they will make hydrogen and pipe the hydrogen to Chicago and to New York because people won't object to a pipe. So I see a huge resource for hydrogen, for fuel cells. Hydrogen is needed as a commodity besides as a source of transport. So I would see electricity being used to make hydrogen. It's just a vector rather than electricity, it's a vector. And we reckon we can make it for about 40 centimetre diesel equivalents by being clever when we buy it. In terms of biogas, we did a lovely report in the IEA on applications of biogas across the planet, and there was lovely examples. For example, Rwanda, huge prisons for various reasons that are highly populated, loads of pollution, but they built a massive digester. So all of the sewage goes into this huge digester. They make biofertilizer. They grow all the crops for the prison community, all the heat in the prison community. So rather than having 5,000 people in the prison, polluted water, they now have a lovely circular economy. And so to me, there's applications that are small, that are big. There's hydrogen. I mean, our work would be in gas as opposed to bioenergy. We look at renewable gases, be it hydrogen and methane. What I find difficult, we have a proposal at the moment that Europe will fund, but they want to talk about hydrogen grid. hydrogen has a far better press than biomethane. So Europe are saying we want to see how much hydrogen can go into the gas grid. The problem with hydrogen is that it's very low molecular weight, so it leaks. You know, it causes embrittlement. So a pipe for methane is cheap, a pipe for hydrogen is expensive. And our perspective is, if you make it to methane, Ireland has an infrastructure of about 6 billion of gas pipes. Like, why would you take them out of the ground there? If you make biomethane in the west of Ireland, you put it in the gas grid, you can sell it to Dublin Plus. And the same in the UK, there's a very, very extensive gas grid, the same in the Netherlands. So rather than taking that out of the ground, if you make biomethane from slurries and dungs and food waste, and you put it into the gas grid, it's in the houses.
Anybody else? Really. You're also very, great, as you say, a great fan of Denmark. What one thing could we hope for that would make Ireland and/or the UK more like Denmark? Is there something that we would be looking for?
I think we have. I'm being careful what I say. I gave a talk before about this type of. And there was a headline in a newspaper, a professor recommends reducing the herd by, but I think we have an acceptance of pollution, be it eutrophication of our waterways, be it our wells being polluted. We have an acceptance of spreading slurry up in the air, and we have an acceptance of, I'm listening to towns in Ireland that can't drink their water. There's boil water notices. And we're afraid to say anything because the agricultural community is very, very strong. But to me, I would like to see, and I've said this to the Minister, I would like to see regulation brought on farming with subsidies for farmers to build. I mean, I live in a rural community, my neighbours are farmers, and they're talking about if it keeps on raining, my slurry tank is overflowing. I mean, we shouldn't be in that situation, and I would love to see a grant aiding of farmers to have bigger digesters, and we're looking now at Dingle of having a large digester, and all these little chips and all the slurry tanks saying, I'm going to overflow next week, so that slurry is taken to the digester. We're looking at the chips in the ground saying, if you drive a tractor in here, you're going to poach the soil. So to me, you tie it all together with the Internet of Things, you subsidise farming. Like, beef farmers don't make money in Ireland. A lot of beef farmers are part-time farmers because they work. We could reduce the herd, they wouldn't lose any money. We have a huge problem at the moment with the meat industry. Farmers aren't happy with the money they make from beef. Dawn Meats has been closed down on strikes. So farmers are not making money from beef. We need our countryside to be green and beautiful. I would see, and with Brexit this may happen because I think 50% of beef eaten in the UK comes from Ireland. 85% of our beef is exported. I would love to see that reducing greatly. I mean, if Brexit happens, you would be eating beef from Uruguay or Argentina, and you'd be chopping down rainforests to make your beef. But I would like to see our beef production decrease and farmers to be paid money to be protectors of the environment and to have large anaerobic digesters and to be producing microalgae and bioproducts and have biorefineries. I would love to see farmers making more money, being more sustainable, being able to get rid of my water treatment system and just drink the water out of the ground. So to me, it's acceptance of pollution from agriculture, and I'm afraid to say that. I think it's too much. And in Denmark, they sat down in 2010 and said we can't continue. By 2020, half has to be digested. By 2030, it's over. And I think we have to do that.
Probably time we drew this to a close then. Sorry,
well, yes, I just wanted to make a point around. I really like the idea of joining things up and causing ourselves to do things differently. And it occurs to me, my background is mainly in coastal engineering, so I'm interested in manifestations of climate change like sea level rise, for example, and the challenge we have on our coastline where we're losing intertidal habitat, or at least traditional intertidal habitat. It just occurs to me that there might be joined up solutions around things like recreating that intertidal habitat for purposes of coastal protection, but perhaps growing different types of crops in that habitat, such as seaweed, which could then perhaps potentially be used as a biofuel. Is that kind of breadth of thinking at the moment included in your sort of work?
We have done a lot of work on seaweed. I think if you look at seaweed biofuel, we'd be the world leading producers of academic papers on seaweed biofuel. We've done a lot of work on the different types of seaweed, and from our perspective, you know, our coastline is about 3,000 kilometres, the Republic of Ireland, depending on the size of grid. And our ocean area is massive. It's about 10 times more ocean than land in Ireland. And what I would love to see is fish farming with seaweed around it. They talk about integrated aquaculture. So you have fish, you have seaweed, you have shellfish. They clean up the waters, the seaweed is brought ashore. And I would not be an advocate of the natural harvest of seaweed. Down in West Cork, they gave out a license to cut down existing seaweed. This to me is shocking, and it really sets any seaweed industry behind. We have a lovely project in the west of Ireland where they're growing seaweed on mats. So the ship goes out and rolls the mat. The mat is covered in spawn, the seaweed grows. 8 months later it's cut, it's brought ashore, you get your alginates, you get your polyphenols. And there's a facility again in Denmark where they have 2 seaweed factories, and the gelling agents are taken out, polyphenols are taken out. The end product goes to biogas, beach cast seaweed, and they produce biomethane and biofertilizer. So to me, the application of biomethane is ubiquitous, and it has major potential in the west of Ireland. And I suppose this probably affects Wales and Scotland. We have lots of communities that are being denuded of its younger people because there isn't the economies there. We would see this as a way of having bioeconomies in coastal rural areas, producing a number of... So they can still have beef, they can still have milk, they can reduce the size of the herd, they can produce biomethane, they can produce microalgae, they can have seaweed, we can eat the seaweed. So to me there's a huge menu of options available, but we need to start doing something. We need policy to start this going.
Right. Bring us back down. So I just want me to thank a variety of people, firstly UCC and MaREI for hosting us tonight, and also